we all, I suppose that they will change. That will change the relations between readers and publishers, between public and authors. So I would ask first Vicent Salvador just to read us his reflection on that subject.
First of all, it's necessary to clarify that technologies that affect the idea of literature are not necessarily new. I think there are technologies in the history of European cultures very ancient, very important, even the addition of the written texts is very important in the history of humanity, and there is an important technology. Technologies are not necessarily new, but have an historical trajectory that passes through ancient states, such as the invention of writing or the introduction of the printing press, up to the arrival of the Internet and electronic texts. The introduction of the printing press, as we know, brought substantial changes to the literary act. For example, an increment in the diffusion of literacy within new social levels. The appearance of figures like the editor and the bookseller within the framework of the cultural industry, and the consolidation of the figure of the author who retains the intellectual and commercial copyright. It was an important change in historical time. Even in this case, the effects of the changes were not the same for literature written in some languages compared to others. In fact, as investigated by Robuster, the introduction of the printing press with the subsequent international expansion of the publishing trade propitiated during a time publishing in a supranational language such as Latin, that moment. And then later on, when the more powerful Romance languages had iterated publishing space, Catalan literature, in the face of languor of decadence, decay, had already lost the history trade. In the light of these reflections, it's necessary now to examine the changes that are occurring in the new technological time, and to what extent they affect the literature produced in the different languages around us. Without a doubt, there are many elements within the literary act that are modified or even reconstructed upon this new basis, such as the production process, the distribution and circulation of the works, the reading mechanisms, etc. Also the commercial possibilities of the process and the opportunities for the creation of a public and agreed critical opinion. The main protagonists of the literary act also participate in this shake-up. The author can lose or voluntarily cede the intellectual and commercial copyrights in favor, for example, of a collective elaboration of texts on the internet. The reader, the figure of the reader, that can become subject to new forms of acquiring reading rights, of publishing, or critical orientation around material reception, ritual supports, and indisputably the figure of the editor as a promoter, selector, and director of literary production finds himself under strong pressure to change. This growth of technological mutation has its risks. For example, the destruction of mechanisms for the creation of taste and criticism is one, without a doubt. And it also brings new opportunities, a certain democratization of publishing rights and maybe even reading rights of the economic growth. It is not necessary to say that the corollary of all this is a radical resizing of the literary market that will affect differently the various languages depending on the socio-linguistic and socio-cultural characteristics, but also on the institutional and private initiatives instigated by the more active members of the respective language communities. In this context, those implicated in literature produced in a minoritary language like Catalan find ourselves faced with a historical challenge, where first one has to start with an ample judicial understanding of the characteristics of these imminent situations in order to advocate with reason and illusion